Hey, welcome back to Spellbound. I'm BJ the Book Witch, and you're watching an episode of Book Both Ways. This is where I chat about books as both a reader and a writer. And today, in celebration of Valentine's Day, we're going to be talking about romance. So, like I said, we're here to chat about romance. And as I think I've mentioned before, and as my friends are very well aware, I don't like romance. It's just not my favorite thing. But as I'm starting to learn, as this month I have read solely romances, that there's a spectrum here at play, and there's a difference between a book that is genre romance and a book that is romantic and belongs to another genre. So let's talk about romance. No, I don't know my own script. I don't know it. So let's talk about genre romance. When you picture a romance, you're probably either picturing a contemporary romance, like The Wedding Date, or you're picturing a mass market paperback with probably a shirtless Fabio on the cover next to a woman in a very billowing dress with like wind in their hair and things like that. Yeah, those are romance novels. But there are other books that are referred to as romance simply because they have romances in them. And that's the spectrum, right? And it's determined by how much of the plot is driven by the romance. And I bet if you were to design a graph of this, the relationship between how much time the plot dedicates to the romance is the exact same relationship to my disinterest in the plot. So let's look at some of these together. Right, so we've got a contemporary romance, The Wedding Date. This book is about a girl. She meets a stranger in an elevator, and the entire book is about her romantic involvement and relationship with that stranger. That is a romance. But then you've also got a fantasy romance, and you've got Blood and Honey. Okay, so this is a fantasy, but it's also a romance because the entire plot and all of the plot points are pivoted around the main character and her relationship to the other main character. That's a fantasy romance. But then you have another fantasy romance like Caraval, and nobody's going to deny the existence of the romance there in Caraval, but the plot points aren't mapped to the relationship. The relationship is very much a subplot. So even though both Caraval and Blood and Honey are both considered fantasy romances, there's a difference there between a book that a fantasy that is romantic and a fantasy that is a fantasy romance. So there's a spectrum, is my point. So now that we have a clearer picture of what we're working with, let's go back to the genre romance books. These are the ones that are purely romance based, and they can be contemporary romance, fantasy romance, paranormal fantasy romance, whatever it is. My friends call these junk food for books, right? And you probably feel the same way about them. They're simple, they're satisfying, and they're pure entertainment. But there's also a stigma attached to romance that isn't attached to other genres. You know, the idea that it's inherently embarrassing to be reading, or that it's something to be read alone in frumpy pajamas, just devouring a whole box of chocolates. Or the idea that it's not worth reading at all, that it's simply smut with no value. But let's talk about that. I mean, we know that these assumptions are inherently sexist, and we know that they're coming from a place of trying to demean things that appeal and market to women and women identifying people. I mean, that's why boy bands and even Frank Sinatra wasn't taken seriously until some old white dudes declared that he was worthy of attention. So we know that that's where it's coming from, but it's also a bit more focused than that. And a large part of it, and I would argue most of it, is about sex and about how romance novels played this role of being one of the first places where women could experience, vicariously, obviously, or even fantasize about women enjoying sex and taking pleasure from sex. And while this was groundbreaking, they weren't too forward thinking just yet. When romance novels first started to gain traction in the 70s and 80s, definitely books with Fabio on the cover, they may have been about female pleasure, but they weren't about female agency. So these books actually ended up being pretty rapey. They were called forced seduction, rape, and about, a woman being stolen away and then rape, and then leading to like romance and a love story in general. That way, women could experience or fantasize about this woman experiencing pleasure without wanting it or chasing it or desiring it, because obviously then she would have been considered a slut. So, rape. But that's outdated, thank God. Books aren't like that anymore. That's gross. Rape is rape, consent is required. Even the Disney princess villain twisted BDSM fantasy novel that I picked up last month still emphasized consent at the beginning of every sexual scene, so cheers to that. Romance novels now are all about female agency, sexually and romantically. They're about giving space to a woman's emotions, feelings and desires and letting her express that and ponder that and then chase what she wants. This whole interest in romance as a genre came about last semester in grad school. I was in one of my lit classes, and in a discussion thread, I said something flippant and inherently demeaning about romance as a genre, something about a lack of literary quality. And one of my peers rightly called me out on it, and she was like, "Yo, have you ever read a romance novel?" And I was like, "No." And I got my ass handed to me. She sent me so many scholarly articles by literary critics and sociologists and philosophers of New Age feminism talking about romance as a genre and talking about how romance is scrutinized so much, about how they have to just constantly defend their existence, as if we don't read for pleasure in all other areas. Guys aren't shamed for picking up one of the thousands of Tom Clancy books about the beefed out guy with the troubled past who becomes a super spy and then has to save the damsel and fuck her exactly once and then say, "I'm sorry, we can't be together because I'm so dangerous." And then he turns into a cowboy and rides off into the sunset to go do it again. You know, we don't say that those books shouldn't exist because they don't have a deep enough literary value. We don't shame men for reading them because of those tropes that exist within that genre and their depictions of masculinity. So why do we do the same thing to women for romances? The Wedding Date may not be a scathing critique on the current socio-political climate, but the fact that it exists at all and shows a woman of any kind having agency in chasing her pleasure means that it is participating in the current literary discourse. And for as simple as the plotline may be, it still features a woman of color acknowledging with her white partner more than once that she is a woman of color, that certain situations are not safe for women of color, discussing racism, sexism, microaggressions. How can we dismiss this book as a whole simply because the plot itself centers on love? Literary critics and social scientists have been studying this for the past few decades as well, sort of the way that we delegitimize happy endings. We as humans, we love a good tragedy. We love the drama. We love it when stories and movies don't end the way that we want them to because they're satisfying in their grief. But when a movie chooses to end on a happy ending, that movie is not taken as seriously. It's completely labeled a comedy just because two people end up happy at the end of it. And for nothing else, that's just sad. Please see Stranger Than Fiction. As social scientists have pointed out, most marriages end in divorce, and the ratio between marriage and lifespan is actually inverted between men and women, meaning married men live longer, married women live shorter, and the relationship between marriage and happiness is consistently downward, meaning that the longer a couple stays married, the less happy they are overall. Asterisk, I'm only referring to the gender binary because that is the language in which these studies have been conducted over the past several years. These statistics are pretty bleak, and looking at them, there's not really a huge case to be made for getting married in the first place. And yet, that's the whole point of a romance. In a romance, a couple has a relationship and then they end up together, happily ever after. That's the whole point. And yet, wait, are we criticizing them because that's not how it works? Because as it turns out, marriages are actually romantic, social, and legal contracts that require work and commitment? That marriages are more than a lust-centered honeymoon phase that's not going to last forever? Because that's the common argument. That at best, romances are ridiculous in their blissful depiction of this fantasy, or at worst, harmful because of it. But wait a second. Right behind my head, I've got books about dragons, fairies, monsters, geisha ninjas, and ethereal carnivals. Nobody is shaming fantasy readers for reading fantasy. Nobody is shaming sci-fi readers for imagining worlds in which climate change doesn't kill us all in 50 years, and nobody is shaming the dudes who are reading big gun super action spy hero Tom Clancy novels because that's not what spying is. So why do we allow it for romance novels? I've seen such a big change in the past decade with millennials and especially Gen Z with how they approach romance novels and also anything. And it's from this bold and unashamed statement of, I like this. I like this music. I like this style. I like this trope. I like this aesthetic. And it is from this attitude that helps shift and ultimately remove stigmas. Watching these incredibly smart and talented content creators on BookTube who are so well read, talking about the types of romance novels they enjoy and the types of tropes they like, that's empowering. Because the stigma on romance novels may be about sex, it may be about female pleasure and more specifically female agency, but it's about more than that. It's about women not having their preferences delegitimized simply because they themselves are the target demographic. Not having to provide a literary, scholarly, socio-political commentary just to be taken seriously. It's enough that it's a romance. It's enough that they're fun to read because that is what books are. So, romance novels or novels that feature romances as the main plotline may not be my favorite genre, just like sci fi isn't my favorite genre. But that doesn't mean that romance doesn't deserve its own spot in the bookstore and in the cultural discourse, besides sci fi, and without the stigma attached that romances are only for sad or desperate or lonely women reading in secret. Romance is a legitimate genre, and maybe romance will start getting taken more seriously when we start taking it seriously. And by we, I mean me. And on that note, here are some romance novels that I've read so far this year. A Touch of Darkness, a modern day retelling of Hades and Persephone. A Worthy Opponent, a fairy tale reimagining in which the princess falls in love with the villain and also they frequent a BDSM nightclub. The Wedding Date, a contemporary romance about a fake dating situation. Deal with the Elf King. This is a fantasy romance, obviously, about a woman who enters into a marriage to unite the Fey world and the human world. The Hating Game, a contemporary romance about an office rivalry. These Violent Delights, a fantasy romance which is a reimagining of Romeo and Juliet set in 1920s Shanghai. The Roommate, a contemporary romance about a woman who needs a place to crash for the summer and ends up moving in with a porn star. And I'm currently reading Kingdom of the Wicked by Carrie Maniscalco, which is a fantasy with a romantic plot, I believe. So those are all the books that I've read over the past couple of months to prepare for this video. I really wanted to give romance a fair shake. I wanted to try everything and read out of my comfort zone to really explore what was out there. And what I discovered was that I still don't like romance, but I do like books that have romantic plots. Not a monster. I do like romance. I just don't want it to be the sole purpose of the story. So out of that list, there was one that I really, really loved this month, and I loved These Violent Delights. And trust me, no one was more surprised than I was that the story that was the reimagining of Romeo and Juliet was actually not the one that was the most romantic of a plot. This story is so epic and it is action-packed and it has a whole adventure to it. Also, it's very violent, which I love. And they chase a monster through it. There's an actual monster. So, yes, there's Romeo and Juliet, and there's other romances involved too, but that's not the point of the story. And that's why I liked it. So, that's my preference, but that doesn't make it any more or less legitimate than the others on the list. And to further prove my point that I'm not cold-hearted, I did want to share some other books that I really love that do have some pretty great romances involved. I really loved the Cruel Prince series by Holly Black. Everyone who knows me by this point should know that. I really liked Daughter of the Pirate King by Trisha Levenseller. I really liked the Caraval series, and I liked The Night Circus. Those have some pretty great romances, but I'm not sure that I would put the romance as the center of the plot. And that extends beyond fantasy too. I really like At the Water's Edge by Sarah Gruen and Lost Lake by Sarah Addison Allen, and really anything by Sarah Addison Allen. Now, as far as contemporary romances go, I haven't found one that I've loved, but I will say that the one that I've hated the least was called Havoc by C.M. Stunek. This is a reverse harem story about a girl who joins a gang to exact revenge on the local police department, the corrupt leaders of the state foster care system, and of course the rival gang. Now, this may seem uncharacteristic of me, but if you refer to the earlier chart, you'll see that I have a particular taste for the less attention on romance, the better. And the romance plot in this series definitely takes a backseat to the revenge plot, which is surprising since this is a reverse harem novel and there are 5 love interests. Also, the proportion between violence and romance in this book is staggering. This is an extremely violent and graphic series. It's basically a bloodbath, and I show up for a good revenge plot. So there you go. That's my ownership of romance, and I'm okay with it. What kind of romances do you like to read? Do you like your romances light and fluffy, or do you like them mixed with action and adventure? Let me know in the comments below. Take care, everybody, and happy Valentine's Day. On this day and every other, you should read books that make you happy. Thanks for sticking around. If you liked this video, give me a thumbs up, and if you loved it, hit subscribe. And as always, happy reading!